Hi everybody, welcome back to the shop. This is Todd with Industrial Comfort. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to make a wood taxidermy deer head. Now, I used a number of templates to get this done for the head, the antlers, and the back plaque, and I'll include links in the description for these templates. Now, I'm going to mention this again in the video, but keep in mind that I had to modify some of these templates either to get the specific look that I was going for, or I had to play around with the printer preferences to get the right dimensions. So it might be a little bit of trial and error. And when it came to the antlers, I ended up resorting to a bit of freehand, again, to get the desired look. It was a great project, and if you have kids like I do, they're gonna love it. So let me show you how to make one of these. The first thing you're going to want to do for this project is a free search on the internet for either a deer outline or a deer silhouette, and one that you think is cool for the project that you're working on. Now, I'll put a link in the description for the one that I use. Just understand that I heavily modified it for the look that I'm going for. There's also going to be a little trial and error in terms of how large you print it. So for the purposes of the size that I'm going for, I printed this across 4 pieces of paper. And for the next step, I'm going to tape this up, cut it out, and then we'll talk about how we're going to get this onto the workpiece to cut it out. So the next step in this project may be determined or limited by the tools that you have in your shop. So we could take this template that we just put together and mount it directly to the workpiece. Now, in this case, I'm using a 2-inch thick piece of cherry. The challenge with doing it this way is that cutting this out with a saw is going to take a while, and the cuts are not going to be that clean. So if you happen to have a router like I do, we're going to use option B, which is mounting this template to a much thinner piece of plywood. This is a 3/8 inch piece. A 1/4 inch would actually be ideal. Once we then cut the shape out on the plywood, we'll mount the plywood template to this workpiece. We'll use a saw to do a very rough outline. Then we'll use a flush cut bit on a router to do all the finishing work. So I'm going to take some 3M spray adhesive. We'll go ahead and glue this to the plywood, and then we'll get started with the cutting. Every so often, viewers will comment on the fact that I've got an original Mark V Shopsmith. So I figured today I'd use the scroll saw and give it a workout to cut out this template. With the wood template now cut, I'm going to use some double-sided wood tape to place this on the wood block that I'm going to be using for the deer's head. Once this is in place, I'll bring it over to the bandsaw to make the rough cuts before we begin routing. I've got a flush cut bit here in the router table, and I'm going to use this to contour the final shape of the deer head. Now you'll notice that it's got a bearing here on the bottom, And what that does is rides along the template and removes all other material so that the material cut away from this wood block will match the template identically. Now, because this bit, if you'll notice, is not tall enough to get the entirety of the thickness of this blank, I'm going to go ahead and switch the bit once I'm done with the bottom side and use a top bearing flush cut bit, which will allow us to remove the rest of the material. Since I'm over here at the router table, I'm going to take the template off and I'm going to put a 3/8 inch roundover bit on so I can smooth out the corners and edges. With the deer head now complete, I'm going to move on to create the plaque that we'll use to mount the head. Now, I'm going to use a paper template just like I did before, but because the cuts are really not that intricate, I'm going to mount the paper template directly to the workpiece, which in this case is a 1x10 piece of wood, I believe by about 14 inches long. Now, once this is done and cut out on the bandsaw, I'll give it a sanding, and then I'll bring over to the router table to run through with an Ogie bit to give it some nice detail around the edges. Then we'll be ready to mount the head. With the plaque finished, I've drawn a line down the center point in the back, and what I'm going to do now is trace out a keyhole hanger, and I'll put a link in the description for these. I'm going to place it about 1 inch down from the top. I'm going to trace it, and then I'm going to bring it over to the drill press and use a 3/4 inch Forstner bit to core out the material from where I've traced the keyhole hanger. That will allow us to not only mount the keyhole hanger, but have enough room for the head of the screw once we mount the deer head. Using the same center line I drew on the back, I'm drilling 2 holes that will accommodate 2 2-inch construction screws that will drive through and into the head to allow us to mount the deer head to the plaque. Now off camera, I'll countersink these holes to ensure that the heads of the screws are nested. I'm ready to move on to the antlers now, and what I've done is simply take some cardboard and trace out some antlers that I think look appropriate. I then trace them on a piece of wood, and this wood happens to be a 1x8 by about 16 inches long. I'm going to cut the shape out on the bandsaw. We'll fit it up and see how it looks. With the antlers now cut out and sanded, I realized that I'd rather have the ears stick out laterally side to side as opposed to in line with the head. So I'm going to cut the ears off with my bandsaw. I'm going to reshape the head, and then I'll glue the ears on, and then we'll go ahead and stick these antlers in place. With the ear removed from the deer head, I've taken over to the miter saw and I've used some double-sided tape to stick to a scrap piece of plywood. I'll then use the saw to split the ear into two, which I'll then use to stick on either side of the deer head. With the ears removed from the head, we're ready for assembly. So I've drilled holes in the antlers, the ears, and then the head, and I'm going to use these 1/4-inch dowels to attach the antlers and the ears to the head. Now, you'll notice that I've taped around where I'm going to place the antlers. The ears I haven't done yet, but I've taped the ears off. And the reason that I do this, if you've noticed from other videos, is that if there's any glue seepage, which there likely will be, I can wipe it off and it won't penetrate the wood. Because if it penetrates the wood, then the final finish, which in this case is going to be boiled linseed oil, will discolor where the glue penetrates the wood, because the boiled linseed oil will penetrate at a different rate. And so I like to minimize any of that by way of putting some of this tape around. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the antlers. Okay, now I always keep a wet paper towel or shop towel on hand so I can just quickly wipe away the glue. This will also let me know that I have it aligned based on where I've put the tape. So I'm going to use the same process for the ears and then for the antlers and the ears on the other side. The glue has set on the antlers and ears, and I've left the tape around the antlers at their bases because I'm going to use some classic gray stain to stain up the antlers just to give them some contrast. For the next step, I'm going to mount the head to this plaque that we made earlier. And you'll notice that I stained it a dark walnut off camera, again, so that we get some contrast with the head. All I've done is drill 2 holes, which will be somewhere along the top and the bottom. I wasn't terribly precise with this. And then I just countersunk the holes so that we could nest these 2-inch construction screws as we assemble this. So I'm just going to get this started, and then we'll screw it in place. All right, so let's get some linseed oil on this thing and call it a wrap. And here's our taxidermy deer head. I hope you enjoyed this project. If you did, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks for watching.